think that our goal here is to try to obviously bring community and our different school communities together. A lot of the leaders that are involved at this in different ways into the conversation, and really create an opportunity for us to have a broader conversation across a lot of our school communities. What I'm going to do is first just kind of outline a little bit of kind of why are we here and what is this all about, share a little bit of my thoughts, but then we have our Ward 6 State Board of Education member, Brandon Best, who's with us, and I'm going to ask him to share a few words, and I really appreciate you co-hosting this with me and helping facilitate this conversation. We also have our Ward 7, as well as the president of the State Board of Education, Ebony Rose Thompson, who's with us, and so I'm going to turn to her in a little bit, have her say a few words. We also have two of our advisory board members, Crystal Gray and Carolyn Bowen. And so I'd love to have them be able to share a couple of words about their thoughts and their process and kind of what their role in all of this is. And then we're going to turn to the Deputy Mayor for Education to help walk through and spend some time talking through. And then at that point, we'll then move to our kind of Q&A and go through some of that conversation. So first off, why are we here? My assumption is that I've got probably a lot of parents on this call that have not seen any of this and are new completely to this process. And we've probably got some parents who are deep in it. So we're going to try to do our best to communicate throughout the night across all of that spectrum. But basically, the Deputy Mayor for Education is conducting the Boundary and Student Assignment Study, which reviews DCPS's boundaries, its feeder patterns, and its student assignment policies with the goal of developing then a set of recommendations that how it impacts families and students. And this is the first update in about 10 years for context, just so folks kind of know how that goes. And when you look at what are the goals of this boundary study, it's so that students would have a clear assignment to schools of right based on DCPS attendance zones and feeder pathways, to look at adequate capacity in those geographic zone DCPS facilities at each level, pre-K, elementary, middle, and high school, including those feeder pathways, trying their best to take current and future population and enrollment trends into account. And then what is incredibly important here is how do we ensure there's equitable access among district students to high quality public schools? So what does the process to actually create those recommendations look like? So there's an advisory committee on student assignment and boundaries, and we're going to hear from two members of that in a little bit. So that's a group of education stakeholders that represent all 8 wards who have been meeting, and in particular been meeting monthly in the evenings throughout December to then help guide what those recommendations are going to look like. It helps, they kind of give advice on the guidelines and the principles for those public school assignments, the school choice policies and practices. They help review the data and information, certainly listen to the community input and interpret that feedback back to the Deputy Mayor. And then ultimately they help develop those recommendations and scenarios that are in a final report that comes out. Now, a lot of people have actually reached out to me asking, what are the next steps? What's going on here? And that's why we really felt this conversation tonight was really important. So there have been school level meetings that have been happening over the last few weeks. There's still a few more that are coming up. I'm finding that those conversations are happening a little bit in silos, and that makes it difficult to see the big picture around how different decisions are going to impact all of our school communities, certainly for me across Ward 6, but across all our communities. There's also a series of citywide town halls coming up, and certainly I'll let the DME share what those dates are and what those look like, but those will be further ways that folks can then get engaged. After that, they then put together a final report that is submitted to the mayor in the winter, and then the mayor moves forward the changes that would take place. So I want to be clear for folks here, this does not come to the council for a vote. It doesn't go to the State Board of Education for a vote. This is an executive function, but certainly we believe our job here is to help hear, listen, get your feedback, advocate, and amplify your voices here. The other piece I get a lot of people ask me is, well, so when, whatever the recommendations ultimately are, when do they take effect? As of right now, the changes from the adopted recommendations would begin to take effect no sooner than school year 2025-2026. So think of that as August 2025. And I think there can be conversation as well about what does that date actually look like. So let me just share a couple of quick comments of my own, and then I'm going to turn to Representative Best to share. Then I'm going to turn to Representative Thompson after that. As I look at this, I will say I've heard from a lot of parents and a lot of school communities, and I appreciate that. And I want to continue to get your feedback. Some of the questions that I want to see answered through a process includes clearly identifying what problems are we trying to solve. I want to understand that. I want to see data that helps support proposals that would be under consideration, I also want to see what plans are being proposed that would make any of these proposed changes actually be successful and work for our students and for our schools. Those are some key questions for me. I will say thus far, I'm skeptical of some of the proposals that I have seen thus far. I've heard from a lot of parents about the same. And so that is part of what I'm trying to think through. I say this as somebody who is a policymaker and a DCPS dad of trying to work through this. As you can see right here, because I have a DCPS student who's trying to sneak his way into this meeting and wave. Thanks, buddy. Proudly wearing his Ludlow Taylor shirt right now. Can you go back upstairs for me? Thank you.
I just want to.
So this is what the risk is of multitasking and how it all works. So let me just say, as we think about this, I will ask one kind of our ground rules for our meeting, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Representative Best to help on his side. And that is, I know that when we've had separate conversations, some of our conversations, I think, in the intention of advocating as strongly as we can for what we see as our school community. I think I've heard that there have been some comments that maybe have not been as complimentary of a lot of our other school communities. And I really want to, as we think about this, as we leave our comments and questions and we have our discussion tonight, just want to kind of plant that as we make sure that all of our conversations are respectful of the entire school community, the impacts here. There's a lot of feelings when we think about what our schools are, because we fight really hard for them, right? So I just want to make sure we kind of share that in context as we have this really great conversation tonight. So Representative Best, let me turn to you. Welcome your open comments. Representative Thompson, I'll turn to you after that. And then we'll go to our advisory board members after that. So Representative Best.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you as a member of the State Board of Education. I'm not only here to discuss the process, but more importantly, to listen and elevate your voices, the voices of our families and our community members. So over the past few days, I've had the privilege of hearing a diverse range of feedback and perspectives from many of you. Your insights and concerns have been invaluable in shaping my understanding of what our community needs and desires from our public school system. But I know there's more to hear, I know there's more to learn, and I know there's more to understand. Today, I'm here to reaffirm that your opinions and your experiences and your aspirations for your child's education should be the driving force of this work. And I understand also that change, especially in the realm of education, can be daunting. We base a lot of our life decisions on the quality of education of our kids. It touches who we are to the core as a community. And that's why it's crucial that as we approach this process, we do so with a collaborative spirit, open minds, and a unified goal of enhancing educational landscape across the district. In today's meeting, I urge you to share openly and honestly, because obviously it's our goal to share your insights in hopes of the DME making an informed, thoughtful, and inclusive decision for all. Remember that this process is not just about redrawing the boundaries or reshuffling the systems. It's about building a future where every child in our district has access to the education that they deserve, an education that empowers them, that nurtures their talents and prepares them for a bright future. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for your engagement and your emails over the last week or so.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Representative Thompson, thank you so much for joining us. Let me turn it over to you.
So I want to say good evening to everyone. If we have not met, because I know that some of you all are new to Ward 7, but not new to your schools or school communities or your communities. My name is Ebony Rose Thompson. I do serve as the Ward 7 representative to the State Board of Education. I also have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the president of the board this year. A few things that are helpful for you to know about how I approach this process. I fully understand that school communities and communities in general are not necessarily political communities, right? So I definitely appreciate Councilmember Allen and as always my colleague Brandon Best, because it is our job to work together no matter what number ward you reside in, to make sure you all are fully represented in this process. So it is absolutely my pleasure to listen in this evening. I'm always happy to be a resource to people. I actually was one of the committee members 10 years ago who made this suggestion we probably should do this every 10 years. And if you are upset with me for saying that, here's why. When I had the pleasure of doing this 10 years ago, well, maybe not pleasure, because there were many meetings like this, but when I participated in this process 10 years ago, we hadn't done this in 40 years. So that was a huge task ahead of us. We had open schools, we had closed schools, we didn't have charters 50 years ago. We had made a lot of decisions about our city. And one thing that the people who know me know that I am always pro planning. And so I'm happy that we are having conversations. I want to make sure people approach these as conversations. It is my expectation, and I am sometimes proven wrong, but would be surprised if I'm proven wrong here, that these are not decisions that have been made, that these really are opportunities for residents to say what they want to see for their schools, their communities, what they want our future to look like. And we're partners with you all in that process. And so thank you again to Councilmember Allen. Thank you to my colleague, Representative Best. And thank you to the DME team and the members of the task force who are here tonight, because I know that you all are taking in a lot of information, both data, stories, opinions, hopes, dreams, concerns, fears, all the things. And I expect that they'll all be incorporated into the fuller decision, and looking forward to working with you in partnership to get there. So I'll be listening in this evening, and thank you for your time.
Fantastic. And really, thanks so much for joining us. I think, one of the things I frequently remind folks about is that, we live our lives oftentimes in the political world by ward boundaries. Schools don't have ward boundaries. So schools that are physically located in Ward 6 or Ward 7 or elsewhere have school communities from all across our whole city. So it's important that you're able to join this conversation, and I really appreciate you being here. So thank you. Next, I'm going to turn to our two DC Advisory Committee on the Student Assignment and Boundary members that are joining us tonight. And with that theme of the fact that school boundaries don't follow ward boundaries, we have two folks that I think are invested in a lot of our school communities, and really kind of highlight what I think President Thompson was just talking about. So we have Crystal Gray and Carolyn Bowen. And so how about Crystal Gray? I'll turn to you first, and then Carolyn Bowen after that, if you want to introduce yourselves a little bit and share a little bit.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Crystal Gray, and I serve as the Ward 6 representative for the Student Boundary Advisory Committee. A little bit my background: I have a third grader that attends Watkins Elementary School, where I serve as the executive committee on a PTA. I also serve on a citywide board with Parents Amplifying Voices in Education, and I'm one of the outreach coordinators with my church that's partnered with DBH on distributing naloxone and resources to prevent overdoses. I chose to serve on this advisory committee, one, to make sure that it's equitable representation for our community and also have a voice in these important discussions that are being made around boundaries. I also joined because the advisory board is a safe place to discuss boundary strategies and difficulties of these decisions being made. Our reflections on the process are very important, and it's our roles during this time. We take into account the school size, utilization, demographic trends, and other factors. I find myself meeting weekly with Jen Comey, texting weekly with Carolyn, and it's been a wonderful experience. It has gotten difficult at times, but that's what we're here for, to have these difficult conversations and have them respectfully. So thank you again for letting me speak.
Fantastic. Thanks. And Carolyn, good to see you, and thanks for joining us too. I know you're multitasking tonight as well.
Well, I pulled over, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm on my Bluetooth on the way home from a lesson with my daughter. So I'm Carolyn. I have a fourth grader at Payne and a sixth grader at Elliott Hine. I've been a resident of the Hill in general for 20 years now, as a Ward 6 resident until the most recent boundary change. So now I'm in Ward 7. And I'm been involved with a lot of things, education forever. My background is in education myself. I was a teacher for 12 plus years. Been involved with the Ward 6 education group. I'm also a citywide board member with Crystal at PAVE. I've actually switched from teaching into urban planning. So I'm in a program at Georgetown. I'm very interested in how all these pieces fit together. So I love being part of the conversation and hearing different voices. And so I think that as people that are on the committee now or last time around would value people from all over the city and hearing different perspectives on the board themselves, and then also logging on to all the various town halls and the various meetings and just taking information from everyone and trying to get as diverse range of voices as possible into the this whole process. So thank you guys for having this meeting. So I think it's great. The more people we hear from, the better. So yeah, I look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts tonight. And we have our next meeting coming up actually tomorrow for our board, and then our town halls, Jen will talk about later. So there's lots of ways to continue to be involved as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And both of you are volunteering your time in these roles. So we really appreciate you dedicating your time in that. So thank you. All right. So for anybody who came in after we got started, just quick catch up. We've heard from myself, Representative Best, Representative Thompson, and our two members. Now we're going to turn over to the Deputy Mayor for Education. What we're going to do is they're going to have about 20 minutes or so to kind of start walking through and do a bit of a presentation. We're then going to move to our kind of discussion and Q&A. If you've got a question that comes up during your conversation here, drop that into the Q&A feature on here. What we'll do is pull all that together. I have a hunch we're not going to have enough time to get to every single question that may be asked as well. So my staff's going to make sure we pull all those together and make sure we capture all of those so we get that feedback and those questions answered. But after the presentation, we're going to spend as much time as we can to get through a lot of those questions and have that discussion. So Deputy Mayor Paul Kine and Jen Comey, let me turn it over to you at this point.
Thanks so much, Councilmember. I will offer a brief round of gratitude, first of all, to the families that have shown up tonight, but also, and maybe especially to Crystal and Carolyn, who have devoted so much of their own time to be great listeners and great conduits of information and shares of information and discussants and really terrific participants in our process so far. So Carolyn and Crystal, thank you. And Councilmember Allen, to you. Representative Best, to you, Ebony Rose, to you as well, President Thompson. We are really, really honored to be here tonight, and we're really grateful to you for leaning in so heavily to invite us in and to help guide this conversation. We are exactly where we should be in this process right now. We've been at work for about 6 months. We are driving a very data-informed process. We've been engaged in probably well over 100 community conversations. We've sought feedback across and throughout the city, and we have identified a number of challenges. And Councilmember Allen, I really liked your framing of the questions you're interested in, because those are exactly the questions we're interested in talking about. And that includes, what are the challenges that we think we need to solve as a system overall and for specific school communities? And then what are the various ideas that have already spun up that could help solve those challenges? And if we were to pursue those ideas, what would it mean and what would the impact be? So we are at the idea stage. We are bringing these ideas to community and to communities across the city in order to get feedback on them. We want to know, to the parents and families here, what it is you think about these ideas and if you have other solutions to the challenges that we're identifying. So we are all ears. And I'll just say before I hand it over to Jen, we are all ears tonight. We are all ears at our advisory committee meetings we're hosting. We are all ears at the town hall meetings. We are coming to school communities. We have scheduled times to do those things, which Jen will talk about, and we're open to meeting separately. So we have office hours. Jen and her team are meeting with school communities that also approach us saying they want to talk about things. So please know that our door is always open across the board for these important conversations. I'll turn it now to Jen with just one note. Jen Comey from my team, who's the Director of Planning and Analysis, also helped to lead this process 10 years ago. So I don't want to age her in her role, but she did a terrific job then, and it's wonderful to have her at the helm this time, bringing that depth of historic experience. So with that, Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Fabulous. Thank you. All right. So thank you to everyone. Let me go ahead. I really appreciate the overview. We're going to touch on just a few things again as we go through. So we're from the DME, and I will share Councilmember Allen and Representative Best. We'll share and both post this presentation, so we have it as well. But as just a quick refresher, I see a lot of familiar names who are attending tonight, and I am sure there are new ones, which is a great opportunity. I want to reiterate that. Thanks for this meeting. But what is the 2023 Boundary and Student Assignment Study? It is a set of recommendations based on findings, analytic findings, and community feedback about how families and students can access public schools. So it is essentially a 10-year plan, thinking about the types of recommendations that could be revisions or updates to school boundaries, revised school feeder patterns, suggested programmatic opportunities, and potentially different or added enrollment lottery preferences. So as President Thompson said, right, the first time we had done it comprehensively was 10 years ago, and before that it had been 40 years. So this is our next round of doing this. And so in particular, you'll see as we sort of, we have one highlight of this here for suggested programmatic opportunities. We're looking a lot at dual language opportunities in the city, and we'll talk about some of those challenges. As I think someone mentioned, this is legislated, so we will be doing this as sort of good housekeeping, we meaning DME every 10 years. Let me go to the goals. Councilmember Allen already covered these incredibly well: clear rights, adequate capacity, and equitable access. So the advisory committee, of which a huge shout out to Crystal and to Carolyn for participating, as well as our 25 other members, it's a 27-member body, came up with these guiding principles. And we did our first round of town halls and sort of thinking, what are the principles that should guide our work? So there are 4: a strong system of by right neighborhood schools, equitable access to high quality schools, predictable and continuous access to schools, and racially and socioeconomically diverse schools. So as a refresher for those who lived through this before 10 years ago, the first 3 are very similar to the guiding principles that we had then. The 4th one is explicit compared to 10 years ago. And so I think it's a real testament that is now part of our guiding principles. And there's a link here that you can get to it where there's much fuller descriptions to explain what they are. As Deputy Mayor Kynes said, where are we? And then where are we going? So we kicked off in March of 23. We're going to submit the final report to the mayor in March of 24. We have had 2 rounds of town halls, first in May and again in September. And it's hard to say these words, but next week we are having our 3rd and final round of town halls, and we'll go through some more details about that in a second. We have had advisory committee meetings throughout, as we have mentioned, and we are at the process right now as with engaging school communities. And so at the town halls, we had the opportunities to hear broadly, and then engaging school communities, we want to talk to schools directly to also get more in depth about their concerns, the rationales, the data that we see, and so forth. And so that's what our team here at DME has been doing since November. And then what's going to happen after next week's town halls is we are going to bring that information all back and continue to collect feedback. The town halls are not our only shot. I'll explain how what that process is moving forward. And then we have until essentially the end of January working with the advisory committee to sort of get settled on recommendations with then a final report submitted to the mayor in 24. So as Deputy Mayor Kynes said, where we are in the process. This is where we're collecting feedback. We've been doing it in earnest over this last month, 6 weeks in particular. And we are continuing to develop ideas. This is not over yet, and we can consider to continue to get more information. So this is the list of who we have heard from so far. In general, we have had 7 community meetings in November. We've got 8 scheduled in December. We're working to schedule an additional 8. And then our town halls are, of course, the 12th through the 14th. And so you can see we've had Brent, Maury scheduled and held, and on our website, we have the materials. Minor, we are still scheduling. So it is a high priority for us to talk to the minor community. As you know, there's been leadership transitions, which has made it a little bit slower, but we are excited to be able to work with the minor school. We've gone back and forth. A PTA meeting is at the same time as one of our advisory committee meetings, but we will find a time shortly to get together and to talk directly with the minor community. We are meeting with Payne, on Thursday, which is the 7th. Peabody Watkins was on the 14th. And then Tyler, we are meeting, or Chisholm, we are meeting in January at their next PTA meeting. And so you can find more information about the meetings broadly, not just the ones here in the Capitol Hill area, on our website. So what to expect for our round 3 town halls. So let me just cover some like details first, some just ground keeping. So there's 3 of them. December 12th is in person at Anacostia High School in the evening. December 13th is a virtual evening, and December 14th is a virtual lunchtime. We have found that lunchtime meetings also work for people. So whatever one you want to attend, feel free. You are more than welcome to attend more than one should you like. It is the same content at each of those meetings. And like everything else, we will record and we will make it available on our website. And so this is what you can expect at the town hall meetings. We're going to have presentations sort of in a main room, call it main room, whether it be in person or virtual, about the challenges, potential solutions, and estimated impacts at the citywide and ward level. And then a presentation about the online tool that our contractors are going to be releasing to explore, again, those detailed impacts and potential solutions, both at a very high level and very specific to your school and even your address. So you can put in your address and you can see where the proposed ideas at this point, these sort of potential ideas, what would impact you in specifically, as well as look at your school and then look at your part of the city. We also are going to talk about ways that you can use the tool and the survey to provide very detailed sets of feedbacks to us, both the technical team and to the advisory committee. And this is something where it's not a one shot. It's going to be open for at least a month once we release it on December 12th. So the first day of the town hall meetings is when we'll release it. And then we'll go into breakout rooms. So when we go into the breakout rooms, we will discuss both the ideas and the scenarios, and there'll be a systems, which we can describe a little bit, which is sort of these higher level policies that could be implemented across the city, as well as 5 grouped feeder patterns. We will hold there also an Eastern High School feeder pattern group as well. So we can talk about these things as well as sort of what we're seeing with the estimations at the town halls. Okay, so that's process. I'm now going to switch a bit to the priority challenges, potential solutions, and impacted schools. This is just a summary slide that puts what we have been talking about in meeting with schools in one place. And then I'm going to pick just a few slides from the meetings that we have done thus far to talk about sort of the explanation of why this has been identified as a priority challenge and what this proposed solution is. Okay, so for the first one, I'm going to call it the cluster. Just to make it simple, the Peabody Watkins. The priority challenge is extended boundary, right? Its sash-like shape result in some families in the southeast corner being far from Peabody, right, which is the pre-K to K campus, and closer to other DCPS schools, namely Payne. So families are actually going past Payne. In some cases, they actually live across the street from Payne, and they are in boundary for the cluster. And so 2 potential solutions or potential ideas that we had talked about is a boundary reduction in the southeast corner, and then a boundary expansion in the northeast corner. So again, I will walk through that in a second. And who this impacts, because this is a jigsaw puzzle, everything is interconnected, is Payne and Brent. Okay, then Brent is another one of our focus schools. The priority challenge is historic overcrowding and a constrained physical site. And so this has a couple different potential solutions that could be impacted. There could be a boundary reduction north of Pennsylvania Avenue. There's its modernization that is coming online, which we expect to come online. Nothing about that has changed. They have just started sort of the process now to start doing the design. And the third one is reduce out of boundary seats. Okay, so the school that this is sort of interconnected with is similar to above, which is the cluster. The third one is Maury and Minor elementary schools. And the priority challenge here is the socioeconomically and racially segregated schools. And I'll go through this in detail, sort of laying this out. The potential solutions are blend the 2 policies together to create a paired elementary school, Minor serving early grades and Maury serving later. Another one is implement at-risk set-asides for schools with less than 30% at-risk students in order to increase those opportunities for students. And so the impacted schools for the blended, it's those two that this would impact. And of course, the impacted schools, this is the data as of 23, there's a little less than 50 schools that have at-risk enrollment of less than 30%. And then the final one is Tyler or Chisholm Elementary School, which we know is renamed. And this is something that I alluded to early on when we were looking at programmatic opportunities. Dual language is really a big focus of this year's 2023 version focus. And so we are looking in many places across the city, and it has come up here where there's lacking nearby dual language middle school programming. So an elementary school, does it have a close enough dual language middle school feeder that families would want, right? It works for them in order to go to. So right now they have, Tyler Chisholm has 2 programmatic feeders, which is Czech and McFarland. And the idea is that Jefferson Middle School would gain dual language programming so that then families can continue on in their dual language curriculum. Okay, I'm gonna walk through, I know it's a lot, so I'm going to walk through a couple. This is the thing where it's nice when we have the big meetings or the individual meetings, I'm able to go a little bit deeper, but I want to hit some key points on 3 of these in particular. And then I'm happy to circle back with Tyler as well. So Peabody Watkins. So this, let me move this out of the way. So the rationale again, I don't think you can see when I move my mouse, you can't see it, right? Oh, you can't, good. Oh, good. Okay, so this is sash, right? This light color is the Peabody-Watkins boundary, with Peabody up here in the northeast, Watkins down here, and this is Payne and Maury and Brent and Tyler, so forth. This is the elementary school boundaries around it. The density in color is the number of is where kids who are enrolled at Peabody or Watkins, where they live. So this is data as of 22-23. So it's essentially density to show where students live. And the idea that we are playing with, and we are going to be able to show at the town hall meetings next week, we can show what this impact is. If this boundary was to be reduced up to about here, and this section, this is the north of Pennsylvania Avenue, were to be added, right, from Brent, you can't just remove from Peabody Watkins. It would make their numbers too small. That if you added a Brent, what would the impact be? And so the reason, again, the rationale for looking at this is this area has to go much further to go to Peabody, and they have to pass both Payne and Tyler along the way in order to get to Payne. And some families who are enrolled at Payne with a proximity preference because they actually do meet the criteria of being closer to Payne than they do to to Peabody. And we've heard a number of concerns. This is just a few. This is not the full list. One is that this would remove families who have historically enrolled and continue to walk-in. So this would have an adverse effect on walk-ins. That this would change the feeder pattern for these families here, that they would no longer be Stuart Hobson and they would be Elliott Hine. And that, of course, Payne has to be able to absorb any additional families without causing overcrowding. And I look forward to meeting with the Payne families on the 7th to talk some more with them. Let's go over to Brent now. Brent has a few slides because there's 3 different ideas, right, that we're talking about. So this is, again, the same type of map, but now this shows the density of Brent students, right? So where Brent students are enrolled as of 22-23. And again, we were talking about this area of reducing it in order to manage overcrowding at Brent. And it also is connected, right, with any sort of reduction for Peabody walk-ins over here. And so there's a number of things that we heard from families that we have talked to them about so far. Is, again, this is families that historically have enrolled at Brent. And there's also been, which I don't have here, there's sort of question of whether these families would continue on to Watkins Elementary after Peabody. And then, of course, the the lottery proximity preference. This is something where they are then, in some cases, still closer to Brent. So there would be a proximity preference to Brent, as opposed to walk-ins in this case. To be clear, all these schools are very close to each other. So this is something of a concern for this rationale. The other thing we want to talk about is, as a potential solution, is the upcoming modernization. So Brent is slated for a modernization. Its design is supposed to start now. It is starting now. As I understand, the contract was signed somewhat recently for the architect to start the design. So it's 2 years of design, 2 years of construction, and then to be reopened in the summer of 2027, so that's school year 27-28. At this early stage, the guiding ed specs or building specifications, it's about 500 plus students that are on that, about 550. And of course, this is going to be, I realize that Brent community has gone through an earlier design, and that this is going to take a new design with this new architect to figure out a feasibility study, and of course the SIP process to figure out the actual capacity and specifications. And so, as we know, there's typical trade-offs on a constrained site. The larger the building, the less you potentially have for parking, playgrounds, outdoor learning spaces. Okay, so this is just something to be thinking about. And I just want to reiterate here at this moment, this is a solution that it is not, the modernization is happening regardless of what the recommendation is for the boundary study. The modernization is going forward. I think the question is there anything else that gets coupled along with it? And then finally, this is just just one piece of the puzzle, which is reducing out of boundary seats. Now, when we talked to the Brent communities, there was very strong preference for making sure that they keep their relatively high out of boundary rate, which I think is around 30% or so. It's much higher at the upper grades than it is at the lower grades. Their in boundary in early childhood is less than 5 kids. But then at kindergarten and up, they do have higher out of boundary seats. In our scenarios that we tested, which we call scenario 1, so stay tuned when you come next week, is looking at all overutilized boundaried schools, at looking at what an out of boundary reduction would do to help manage overutilization. And what is great about the modeling that is happening with our consultant is it's not as if it's just happening to Brent, right? It is all puzzle pieces, it's all interrelated. And so when you do it across these different schools, then what's the ripple effect, right? If there are fewer out of boundary seats being offered. And so again, please come next week and you can drill down using the interactive Boundary Explorer to see the impacts. Okay, last couple slides is the Maury Minor. And so again, the problem that we're trying to solve, I'm going to go to this first and then I'll go backwards, is looking at the extreme differences in at-risk enrollment between adjacent schools. And so as we showed at the Maury meeting, whenever it was, last week or the week before, there are 44 pairs of adjacent elementary schools that have at least a 25 percentage point difference between students who are at risk. And in 37 of those pairs, which is the green pairs, there's a difference between 25 and 49. And then in 7 pairs, the difference is greater than 50. And in the Maury deck, we have, and of course, I'll share this with Minor as well, we have each of those pairs listed. But what ends up happening is that Maury Minor are the only schools that are actually adjacent and don't have any geographic barriers, that this could potentially be an option, which is to do this, which is to blend the separate boundaries into one, again, make Minor early grades and Maury later grades. It can help a more even distribution of at-risk students and can help manage any future overcrowding that might happen down the road for Maury as well. Of course, many concerns that have been reiterated or mentioned, and these are just a couple of them: logistics, concerns with safety, around Benning, and a lot of questions, understandably, around staffing and leadership, a lot of questions around logistics. And so while we are at the idea stage, we are not at a point to start figuring out the implementation. If this becomes a viable enough idea and it were to be put into the report and then a decision to be implemented, then there would be a whole process of which we would figure out the logistics with the school community on how to make this work. And so I appreciate Councilmember Allen's point earlier that 25-26 is the earliest that any boundary or feeder adjustment would happen. For something like a paired school, this would be a much longer timeline. This is not something that happens quickly. Okay. And here's some data that looks at the different discrepancies between Maury and Minor. These are some boundary facts. So just as a point of reference, this is those students who are pre-K to 5 in either DCPS or public charter schools. They don't have to go to Maury or Minor at this point. They just live in the boundaries, right? Those two separate boundaries. So there's about 700 in Maury. There's about 860 in Minor. The in-boundary participation rate, meaning of those students that live in the boundary, it's 64% for Maury, 26% for Minor. This again is the students who live in the boundary. The percentage of Black students for Maury is 25% and it's 73% for Minor. And white is 55% for Maury and 19% for Minor. This is where the discrepancy, the adjacent discrepancy comes up. There is 15% of at-risk students who are identified as at risk of academic failure versus 60% at Minor. And then you can look at special education and the number of schools that students are enrolled at. Here's looking at the school facts. So now this is once families decide whether to exercise their boundary right, their geographic right, or they lottery in as out of boundary. We can see how enrollment has gone up in Maury we did pre-COVID, and then the most recent data from in the audit, so 527, while Minor has stayed flat, I would say. In boundary enrollment, so this is the percent, the denominator here is the enrollment at the school. It's 84% for Maury and 62% for Minor. And again, this is where the percentage of at-risk students that are enrolled, it's 12% for Maury and 64% for Minor. And then we can look at the demographic differences, which has mostly stayed the same over these couple of points in time. Another point that we want to look at is utilization. So how full is the building? 86% for Maury and 62% for Minor. Okay. Tyler here is again looking at their McFarland check middle school rights are very far, and that there is an opportunity potentially to have a much closer alignment with their geographic feeder, which is Jefferson already, that they could then have continued their dual language programming. So next steps, we have the town halls, we have advisory committee meetings, and there's lots of places to provide input, of which we have a bunch of different links and so forth. Okay, Councilmember Allen, I feel like that was a mouthful on my part.
No, thank you, Jen. I know that was a lot, but I appreciate you walking us through that. And kind of as I talked about at the beginning, while a school-specific conversation, you're going to be able to have a lot deeper piece. We know that our school community, we are all in one big community. And so having us be able to break down some of those siloed conversations and have a larger one is really important. So thank you for doing that. We have over 200 people that are on this call, which is outstanding. I also can tell you right now, it guarantees we are not going to get to every single question that's asked. But as I mentioned earlier, please put your question, drop it into the Q&A. We're going to capture all those questions so we can work on them. Also make sure we give that feedback to the DME. What I'm going to do is try to get through some of those questions, though. I'm going to start with some of the general questions and then hit some of the school specific ones, because I think you'll be able to answer some of the general ones maybe a little bit more quickly. But so Deputy Mayor Kine and Jen Comey, I'll kind of direct them, both of you, and then you guys decide who's the best to respond here. But Dan had asked, if a child is already in a school and their in-boundary school changes, would they have to change schools, or do they get grandfathered in to remain in the school and the feeder pattern in which they're attending?
Historically, we have grandfathered, and we would anticipate doing the same thing.
Okay. And that includes through their feeder pattern to middle school?
Correct. If you're in the school, then you have the right to follow the DCPS feeder pattern, and we're not contemplating changes to that.
Okay, thank you. Jill asked a question, are the numbers of comments that are being, let me rephrase that. Jill says, are numbers of comments being weighted more than the comments themselves in terms of the feedback you're hearing? her point is some communities still don't have an appropriate awareness and haven't had the opportunity to amplify their voices. The delay in scheduling some of these meetings and calls is concerning and signaling less interest in certain communities. How are you taking that feedback, I think is the piece here. And are you weighting the number of comments or the comments themselves?
I mean, I would be remiss if I were to claim that there is a fine science to this. I will share, I think, however, that we can assuage that concern in two ways. First of all, we're nowhere near too late in the process. And if we're scheduling a meeting, for example, later in December or even in January, we fully anticipate listening carefully to the feedback that we're getting in the context of those discussions and meetings and weighing them just as strongly as we would for meetings that we held earlier in the process. So there's no priority order, let's put it that way, of timing on these discussions. I would also share that we, of course, pay great attention to communities where lots and lots of people come out with a singular voice or sharing a perspective. So it's not like if there are, we get 100 people showing up and saying one thing, we weight that equally to one person saying another thing. That's just not how the process works. We're doing our best. We do some surveys in communities, which we pay attention to at the meetings. We do try to look for a preponderance of what the perspectives are. And so we do try to take account of where the feeling of the overall community is as best we can.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Catherine asked a question. We touched on it earlier, so I just want to make sure you have a chance here to help lay out this for everybody about what are the next steps after recommendations are submitted to the mayor. Is there a vote? Is there a vote? Do parents get any final input or final say? Can you outline those next steps? And just for the folks that may be tuned in later as well, this is an executive function. This doesn't come to the council for a vote. It doesn't go to the Board of Education for a vote. But let me make sure you can clearly outline your next steps, which you touched on a little bit, Jen, in your slide, but I want to give you a chance to that.
Yeah, I would say in addition to what Jen shared as being the process of getting to the recommendations, which we are trying to do in a very, very sort of community-driven, fact-based way, it's our hope that we'll get to a set of recommendations in the report that are broadly considered to be in the best interest of our students and our families and our school system overall. Those recommendations then go as recommendations to the mayor. It is an executive function, council members, you're saying. And then the mayor will make the final determination about, which of them to implement and when to implement them. Given the process that we're undergoing, this sort of year-long process, and given the depth and level of community engagement, it is our hope that any recommendation in the report is going to be implemented. So that's what I would say. At the same time, the reality is, and being very, very practical, this will be a set of recommendations for the mayor, and the mayor will decide.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And one or two more general questions, and I'll move into some of the school-specific ones. Jacob asked, how does the boundary study coordinate with a facilities plan? The cluster school proposal seems like it would require facility changes, for example, shifting ECE classrooms into upper grade school classrooms or vice versa. Obviously, I think this hits on some of the concerns we've heard back from the Brent community talking about an upcoming modernization and how that impacts it. How does the boundary study coordinate with the facilities plan?
It's a great, great question. The Deputy Mayor's office, my office, is actually currently undertaking not just the boundary study, but a couple of other very important consequential studies, which we're also engaging with the community on, one of which is the master facilities plan. And that's a process whereby we are identifying updated and we think better capacities of school buildings, where we're doing the 5- and 10-year projections for school populations with some degree of rigor. All of that goes to inform decisions both within the MFP, but also some of the underlying data and assumptions we're making in this process as well. So these things are very closely connected. In fact, the same contractor, I'm happy to say, is actually helping us with both of these studies. More specifically, if there's a recommendation in the boundary study that actually does have facility implications, then we will state that and undergo that knowingly. And it'll be clear, for example, if we end up adopting as a recommendation that the Brent challenge with overcrowding in the future should be resolved through its modernization. We'll simply say that in the report, and we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. And we'll only say that if we know it to be feasible. So I would say that there's a good through line, both from the master facilities plan into the boundary study, but also from the boundary study to any recommendations we make that will impact facilities. Jen, anything you'd add?
No. Sorry, Councilmember Allen. I think you might be muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. For folks, just time awareness, it's 7:54. We're going to go a few minutes past 8 o'clock to try to get through as many questions as we can. Keep those questions dropping in. Again, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. We're capturing all of them though, but let me move to some of the school specific questions. Jeff asked a meeting regarding possible boundary changes that would pair Minor and Maury elementary schools together has been held for Maury parents. When will the meeting for Minor elementary parents occur? And I will add as well from Julie along the same line here, because part of the conversation around those two schools is around a desire for equity. Equity is extremely important, as she notes. I think the divide is clear when we find out that the Maury community was told about the possibility in early November, while the Minor community wasn't even contacted by the DME staff until after the Maury town hall. I will say I have heard that concern expressed from a lot of the Minor community that DME went to Maury first and didn't reach out to both schools. And I think that it really undermines some of the concerns that you've outlined of your goals overall. And I definitely want to respect the Minor community's concern about the way in which that was reached out, and want to make sure you can answer that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And I hear the feedback and we take it on board. I will share you from a very practical perspective. We actually reached out to the schools at the same time, but the Minor leadership transition really stalled us. And for us, the principal has been the primary point of contact. It's, in retrospect, could we have done that differently to get to the communities at a similar time? There might have been some other avenues to pursue, but I will share that we were trying to work with the school leadership and we're just slowed in that process. So we are in contact with the Minor school. We are working to schedule that meeting. We're happy to come out more than once. We want to make sure we hear from as many families as possible. We don't want any family to feel as though their voice is somehow less valuable. That is simply not what we believe and not how we have approached this work. So we will work very, very hard to ensure that we're listening to and incorporating voices of all the Minor families and folks in that community as well.
Okay. Richard asked, when a cluster with Minor was proposed last time, 10 years ago, we were told that if there is a cluster, all the instructional staff would need to go through an application hiring process to seek positions in whatever the new entity is. There'd be no guarantee they'd have the same or similar positions after a cluster is established. If this is the case, be very disruptive to both schools, he says. Some teachers could be lost entirely. Relationships that have been developed over many years would be upended. He's talking about Maury, and he says, I presume Minor as well, has programs that are important to the school, but not a part of every school curriculum, the think tank, for example, or upper grade educational aids that are paid for by the PTA. How would those programs be maintained and integrated through this proposed new cluster?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and one I will share. I don't think we've got a good specific answer to. I will share with you that it would certainly be my commitment and intention to honor the instructors and programs that currently exist, because that's part of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to blend and merge two high quality schools with good programs to make better outcomes overall and have a more diverse and enriching environment for all the families. So it would not be our intent, and it would not be my intention at all to be recommending that we somehow do a restart of these schools. That's not what this proposal is.
Okay. I'm going to stay in the similar theme for a moment, and I promise to the Brent folks and others, I'll move to a couple others in a moment with you. Shavana asked, what would the impact of a Maury Minor cluster model be on funding for both schools? If one school, and I think Minor currently receives more funding or resources than Maury from DCPS, would that funding be combined? Would it reduce the absolute total? What would the funding mechanism look like for both schools to all of a sudden become one cluster school?
That is a good question, and I would say we'd look at Peabody Watkins as an example. But Jen, you may have a more specific answer than I've got right now.
I mean, I think one thing that helps get at it, it doesn't actually figure out what budgets would be, is looking at the estimated impact, which is under scenario 3 for the Maury minor, and you can see how that would shift at-risk enrollment. And so we know this is one of the pieces that helps contribute additional dollars to Maury minor, let alone then gets us above the Title I funding threshold. So there's a couple different pieces that we can hint at it, but what we have right now isn't going to necessarily lay out exactly how the funding would then work for, at the individual schools. But I agree with Deputy Mayor Kind, right? There's a lot of questions around implementation on how it would actually work. But I do think if there's an ability, I think one way of sort of seeing on how we know if additional dollars follow the students and for additional need of students, that you could see that these two schools would get more money. Certainly Maury would get more money than they are currently.
Okay. So I'll say those kind of two, I think, lead really well into Jacob's question, which was how do the school communities, how does DME determine the merging of a minor and a Maury into a cluster about whether it's feasible and if it will be successful if so many of the logistical details don't come until later. I think I'm hearing from a lot of parents who are trying to understand if there's so many details that must come later that have yet to be worked out, how do we assess this is going to be a successful model, or here's the details of how this can be a successful model?
Well, our journey is that we are right now looking at this as an idea, potentially a good idea, one we may or may not choose to recommend based on feedback we get and the analysis we do to resolve a problem where we've got schools that are not as socioeconomically integrated as we would like. And if we believe the idea has some traction over the coming 2 months, we, of course, will consider, and particularly with DCPS, about whether it is feasible. I think fundamentally, from a funding perspective, we believe it is, even though we haven't worked out the fine-tuned details, because you'll have students, and in theory, more students attending the schools. We would certainly be able to understand what to do about staffing, so it wouldn't be a restart, so you'd know what you'd be doing on that front. And so we would look at the broad strokes kinds of logistical questions and ensure that we had enough of an answer to believe it could be done. So what you're hearing tonight is we want to know whether you think this is a reasonable idea to pursue. Does the community like this as a potential idea, so that we can continue with our analysis. So we won't make a recommendation on this if we don't believe that it could actually be implemented with some fidelity, and that's work we'd have to do over the next couple of months.
Okay. I want to make sure I move to some of the other questions as well. I will just make sure I note here, Susan had dropped a point in that she had joined the Maury Elementary School DME meeting last week, and there really wasn't much discussion of the other idea that's on the slide about a lottery set-aside option for at-risk students as a possible solution. And I think the conversation has largely been also around, again, the cluster, not about that option. So I think as those conversations continue, I think there's an interest from parents to also say, what is this other idea? Because I don't think there's been a lot of discussion about that. Let me try to keep moving to some other questions. And if we have some additional time, I'll keep making sure we come back to that as well. One of the things that I've also heard, and Suzanne brings this up, but it's one I've heard from some other parents as well, related to possible changes to the cluster boundary and the Brent boundary. And this is coming from the cluster school, is that Suzanne writes, a concern that was voiced about potential changes for Peabody-Watkins was that it could reduce diversity for the cluster school overall. Why isn't that listed as a concern?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. I think it's very important. And when we look at the modeling results, we'll be able to see on how it impacts diversity. So that is certainly part of what we're looking at, and we'll be able to see next week what the impact is estimated to be.
Okay. And Jen, can you say again when that modeling tool becomes available publicly?
The 12th, the first town hall meeting.
Okay. All right.
December 12th, sorry.
And help me make sure I'm describing this correctly. For those of us who had the joy of going through redistricting, but also went through tools where you could actually move census tracts around and see impacts. Is it similar in that, in terms of it's a public forward-facing type of mapping tool that has the data, and then you can make changes to it, and then you see the populations reflected. Is that the way that works?
So there's sort of three parts to the tool. So the first part is looking at sort of the impact on scenarios, and then you can, and so again, let me just give a quick primer on the scenarios. The scenarios, there's three of them. The first one is targeted towards strengthening neighborhood schools and focused on utilization, and has a multitude of levers that are policy ideas that are nested in that. The second one is programmatic access, and the third one is equitable access to schools. And so you can drill in on any one of those scenarios to see what the impacts are across the city, within a ward, or within a school. So that's number one. And then you can go, there's also sort of like a boundary drawer that you could see if you were to adjust a boundary, what its impacts would be. But we have been doing a lot of work so far on these ideas, and we're also hoping that people spend time focused on sort of what the estimated impacts are, because as we mentioned, we are not done. And we need to go back and reassess things, and we're very interested on hearing people's feedback. So as they look at those individual things, then they can drop comments, they can give their ratings to it, and then we get that information back and we'll share with the advisory committee.
Okay. I'm going to stick with Brent for a second, and then I'll come back to some others. I'm going to kind of two people's questions because they're somewhat related, I think. So Abby asked, why is Brent a part of the conversation if its modernization plans are coming and are already in progress, are funded, and can address any potential concerns around overcrowding? The enrollment numbers shared here do not indicate overcrowding, so the real reason for these proposed changes remains unclear to many of us in that school community, is written by Abby. Jean asks, similarly, I want to pick up on this, is on what basis is Brent historically overcrowded? She writes, its public spaces are overcrowded, largely due to antiquated public spaces, i.e., only one multi-purpose room, a very small library, very little breakout space, but not due to classrooms. Moreover, the planned modernization undoes the overcrowding and then some. The Brent community is in favor of a larger Brent with more out-of-boundary military equitable access students, not a smaller and more homogeneous Brent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is part of the way we see it is we are looking at, as Deputy Mayor Kine, and I think the question you had asked earlier, Councilmember Allen, is thinking about the intersection between facilities and planning, and boundary and student assignment access. And so with boundary just being with Brent being at the very beginning of its modernization, I think this is just doing our due diligence to look at the full set of options that are on the table at this time.
Okay. And then I'll just kind of note, and they noted here, says not really a question, I think, but within something from what Molly had written, I think similar concerns again about space was fewer space. By reducing spaces, fewer spaces will result in fewer spaces for out-of-boundary students, including military-related students. Brent actively welcomes out-of-boundary students, and shrinking the boundary will limit the out-of-boundary students who stand to benefit. And then the concern that with a smaller school space, then that means fewer funding. And so you'll have Brent teachers that lose their jobs. Decreasing the number of students means a decrease in the number of teachers who can work at Brent. So I think those are just kind of, Jen or Deputy Mayor, if you wanted to address those, but I think that's just, again, another concern that we are hearing from Brent.
Yeah, I think another piece that I think is helpful with the master facilities plan is our contractors walked 109 DCPS buildings. And not only did they help do a categorization of spaces, but they also did an assessment on what they're calling educational facility adequacy. And so doing certain ratings on different types of spaces. And we're happy to share sort of how those ratings are falling. Utilization that we're using for understanding over and underutilization is one metric out of many that we look at when we think about sort of facility needs. And so I think that's a real opportunity with this master facilities plan this time of providing that type of information.
Okay. Let me ask a question around the conversation you had around Tyler Chisholm Elementary School and Jefferson. Currently, and I've talked with several parents that have graduated from Tyler, soon to be Chisholm, and go to Jefferson. Because of the language program at Tyler, 6th graders at Jefferson are taking 7th grade Spanish. 7th graders at Jefferson are taking 8th grade Spanish, but there is no 8th grade Spanish that's offered. So when you talk about programmatically, what exactly are you proposing then for Jefferson that would then allow it to align with Tyler's Spanish and immersion program?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think there's a lot of this sort of similar to other things of implementation. It needs to work well and to support Tyler. So I think that is, it's going to be great when we have our meeting. I have talked to Principal Brand now multiple times. We weren't able to make the November PTA meeting, but we'll do the January one, and we're happy to get that information and of course connect. Obviously DCPS in the end will help make sure that that programming makes sense to support our dual language kids, right, as they're coming up through, because that's the whole idea.
Okay. Let me turn to a couple more of our general questions that I think kind of cut across all the school communities before we wrap up, and I'll try to wrap us up by around 8:15 or so, since we're already a little bit over. Richard asks, has the Deputy Mayor's Office reached out to the teachers at all of these schools to get their viewpoints on the recommendations?
The way we're working now is we're starting with families and students. And of course, we want to hear from educators. We haven't yet specifically gone to the school by school teaching corps to ask what their perspectives are. I will share that we have heard from teachers at a variety of schools through the various forums that we've offered, but we haven't done it systematically. When we get to the more considered recommendations, the ones that we think may make it into the report, we will work with our colleagues at DCPS to understand what some teacher perspectives are at the schools as well. That's a very important piece of this equation.
Okay. Courtney wrote, I'm interested in how this comprehensive study was applied to schools in Northwest and other parts of the city, many of which are racially segregated schools with very affluent families. How have these schools been addressed in addition to the schools that you've singled out on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, thanks. It's such a good and important question. I will share in the first instance that we're treating the entire city as a system. We're treating every corner of the system in the city in exactly the same way. We do have some what we're calling system level ideas to look at, for example, socioeconomic integration. The one that would apply potentially across all schools would be the 30% set aside of at-risk students for those schools that don't actually have up to 30%. The reason that we're looking at Maury and Minor in particular is something that Jen covered in her brief presentation, but we did look to see where we had schools that were adjacent that actually had quite different socioeconomic demographics. And we looked at the at-risk proportions of those schools. And we did look all over the city where we had schools that were proximate and could potentially be paired in the kind of way that we're describing here. And the only pair where there was no geographic impediment between the schools, and I think there were 7 pairs altogether, Jen, that we looked at. The only place where it seemed like it could be even viable or feasible as an idea was for Maury and Minor, which is why it ends up as an idea for consideration. But we are treating, as I said, all the schools and every corner of the city in the same way as we look to try to make a system that is more equitable, stronger, has better and easier access for all families.
Okay, thanks. One item that wasn't discussed, I don't think, unless I missed it, Jen, here, but has come up in some of their conversations, is that one of the DME's non-school specific issue, but a systems issue, is also looking at standardizing the beginning of middle school. So whereas currently many charter schools begin their middle school in 5th grade, DCPS starts in 6th grade. What would be the rationale, and why do we believe that that would help align our middle school years as well as be good for our DCPS elementary schools?
Thanks, Councilmember. Yeah, we didn't come up here this evening, but one of the system ideas that has come up from our various community engagement sessions is the idea that we may want to make, in addition to recommendations to the mayor, we may want to make some recommendations to the public charter school board. As we know, in our system of governance, we've got the public charter school board, which authorizes and oversees the charter sector and has legally binding contracts in the form of charters with each charter LEA across the city. There is some concern among some families that when you start charter schools earlier than 6th grade for middle school, so if you start them in 5th grade, you're creating a set of potential challenges. So for example, you're creating a challenge where you end up with some schools that'll lose a number of students in their later years, like the 5th graders will no longer be there, that otherwise would have been there, and families that may want to keep their kids in an elementary school they love through its final year won't get a chance to do that. Separately, there is some question that's been raised around information access and whether or not it's actually quote unquote fair to start middle schools in 5th grade when there may be a number of families across the city that actually just think middle schools start in 6th grade and that's when they're going to enter the lottery and apply for those spaces. So we're currently trying to do a little bit of analysis to confirm if those things are in fact true based on what we know, and we are considering that recommendation and maybe 1 or 2 others directly to the public charter school board to consider as it does its authorizing of charter schools. So that's the idea, and that's a little bit of the rationale.
Okay, that's helpful. And I know it didn't get a lot of attention here, but I think it's important. But also one of the things you said in there, which is it would be a recommendation. It is not an act that the deputy mayor is able to implement. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
Okay. All right. Recognizing that we're kind of about 15 minutes over time, I think this is a really good question that was asked that I think is a good one to kind of end our questions on. Mike asks, what's the contact information? Basically, how can those that want to send feedback outside of a public setting be able to do so? In other words, that there are some parents who want to raise concerns or share their feedback, but maybe don't want to do that in the middle of a public Zoom webinar and would prefer to do that in a private way. What would be the best way for folks to get you feedback like that?
So I will let Jen talk some specific, about specific, but I will share with you, we're getting feedback in all kinds of ways, both directly and in these discussions. Crystal and Carolyn are wonderful sources of discussion and conversation and great places to go for some deeper conversations and to provide direct feedback to representatives from families, from parents who are sitting on the committee and are there all the time. And then Jen Comey and her team is another great place to go. Jen had put her email address on that slide. But Jen, why don't you talk about that and then the other ways that we're looking for feedback through some of the forums and our website.
Yep. I think that's great. And yes, the more feedback, and I get it that in these sort of larger public settings, not everyone feels comfortable. So you're more than welcome. There's a number of different ways. First, we have an online form that I believe my last slide has that people can then submit thoughts and feedback, and we check it, if not daily, every other day. The second one is the scenario tool, that interactive boundary tool, I forget the name right now, is a great place to send information. It will go to the full technical team to get information. So if you have thoughts on particular policy ideas or how it's impacting a particular part of the city, please, I can't emphasize it enough. Please use that tool. It's going to be a great way for us to collect, systematically collect a lot of information. And then you are more than welcome to both email me. It'd be better also if you email the dme.planning@dc.gov. So that way it doesn't get in I have a very large inbox right now. So that way there's multiple folks from the team that can all help manage and respond. But we read all the feedback that you send, that community members send.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, we have had over 200 people join the call tonight, which is outstanding. And I think it shows the degree of interest here. So my big thanks to all of our parents. A lot of questions got asked. We've captured all of them. There's no way we're going to have time to get through every single one of them, but my team and I have been grabbing all of those to be able to do that. I do want to turn just for our panelists here, if Crystal and Carolyn, if you had any kind of closing thoughts you wanted to share, if you wanted to jump back on, and then I'm going to turn to Representative Thompson and Representative Best if they had any closing thoughts as well. So let me see if Crystal or Carolyn are still here.
I am still here. I agree. There's a lot of other comments and questions that it's good to know you're collecting them so that we can figure out the best way to respond, whether it's through you or through future conversations. So I just I've been reading through all of them, and thanks to everyone for your input.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. Crystal, anything you wanted to conclude with?
I think I want to conclude with we're really trying to make the best decision for everyone. Everyone that's involved in this process, all kids, all boundaries. We're not just looking at our wards and our schools, even though we sit down with our feeder pattern and sit down with our wards, we're really looking at the recommendations to make the recommendations fair and inclusive for everyone. So you don't have to worry about that.
Thanks. Representative Thompson, let me turn to you if you had any closing thoughts.
I want to thank everyone for their time and attention tonight. I also want to echo my understanding of how frustrated a lot of the people are on the call, especially the minor families who feel like they didn't get information in a timely fashion. I can't do anything but acknowledge that, and I think it needs to be acknowledged. I will be attending the minor meeting as it is scheduled. I'm happy to follow up with the PTO and anyone else because I know that we spend a lot of time in these meetings and everything can't fit in the meeting and everyone can't attend a meeting, but that does not mean you shouldn't be heard or addressed. My email address is my name, just like everyone else's. If you want to reach out to me, please do. So I want to thank you all, and I just want to make sure to underscore that I do understand the frustration around the communication in general, and I hope that this is one step toward remedying that and encourage people to continue to engage and continue to reach out to us.
Thank you so much. And then Representative Best.
Yeah, thank you. I just also want to thank everyone for their time and for the questions that you've prepared and that you've asked. There are a lot of nuanced questions that we really need to make sure that we have answers to so that our families can see that we are doing this the right way. So once again, just thank you for your time. And that's all I have.
I appreciate that. Well, I want to thank our panelists, so our advisory board members and definitely our two State Board of Education members. I really appreciate you co-hosting this important conversation. To the Deputy Mayor for Education, for your team, appreciate you coming in to help be able to answer some questions and lay this out. I think there was a lot of value in this. Clearly still a lot of concerns, but I think a lot of opportunity here to be able to have you present that and be able to hear some of the questions and comments back. To all of our parents and caregivers and educators that are here, really appreciate you taking the time out to do this, and you can kind of hear the important questions I think we're looking to see answered in all of this, but also most importantly, hear your concerns and then be able to help represent those and help amplify those throughout this process. What I think I can commit to doing as well, because we had so many people, over 200 that joined us tonight, we can do a follow-up email as well. There was a lot of kind of contact information and some email addresses that got dropped at the end here. So what we'll do, I'll commit to making sure we capture some of that information and be able to send that back out to everybody, as well as a link to, because since we recorded the meeting, so you've got that to share with others too. So maybe give us a day or two on that, but we'll work on pulling that together for everybody. But again, my thanks for everybody for hanging in there. I know we went over time. That's because we had so many questions and we still couldn't get to all of them. So I appreciate it. Hope everybody has a wonderful night and look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thanks, everybody.